The most irritating thing about working in a Class A galactic medical station wasn't the 16-hour shifts, the constant risk of cross-species contamination, or even the occasional patient who exploded. No, it was filing paperwork in 17 different languages while trying not to accidentally declare someone legally dead in Zentorian, which, coincidentally, used the same glyph for recovering well as it did for terminal decay. The human doctor currently wrestling with this linguistic nightmare had spent 3 years earning her xenolinguistic certification just to avoid such clerical homicides. She'd graduated top of her class from Earth's Interstellar Medical Academy, mastered 12 types of alien anatomy, and could perform surgery in zero gravity. Yet here she was, double-checking whether she'd just prescribed medication or ordered a ritual funeral for her Maruskian patient. "Doctor," the station's AI chimed in with its annoyingly pleasant tone, "there's an incoming emergency transport from the Draknid Imperial vessel Eternal Majesty, Priority Level Alpha." Priority Level Alpha typically meant one of two things. Either someone very important was dying, or someone very important had a hangnail and enough political clout to make it everyone else's problem. Given that it was a Draknid ship, the doctor was betting on the latter. The Draknids, self-proclaimed masters of the galaxy's outer rim, had evolved from something resembling a cross between a dragon and a peacock. They combined the worst traits of both: breathtaking arrogance and a tendency to set things on fire when upset. The medical bay's doors hissed open, revealing a Draknid noble whose scales literally sparkled with embedded precious gems, a fashion choice that made the doctor wonder if these beings had never heard of infection risks. Behind him, 6 servants carried what appeared to be his personal medical equipment, each piece probably worth more than the station's annual budget. "I require immediate attention," the noble announced, his translator rendering his words in what the doctor recognized as a British accent, because apparently even alien translation software defaulted to making the wealthy sound like they'd just stepped out of Downton Abbey. "Of course," the doctor said, activating her diagnostic scanner. "What seems to be the problem?" The noble's crest flared, a sign of either agitation or an attempt to impress potential mates, though in the doctor's experience, with Draknids, these were often the same thing. "I have been experiencing discomfort in my tertiary breathing chamber. My personal physician suggested it might be related to the atmospheric calibration on my ship, but I require a second opinion, from a real medical facility." The doctor bit back a comment about how this real medical facility was actually a converted cargo bay because the station's budget had been cut 3 times in the past year. Instead, she reviewed the readings from her scanner. "I'm not seeing any significant—" "Are you questioning my experience of pain?" the noble interrupted, his scales shifting from their normal iridescent blue to an angry purple. "Do you know who I am?" "Someone who's about to receive excellent medical care," the doctor replied smoothly, "as soon as you allow me to complete my diagnosis." The noble's personal servants collectively gasped at what they clearly perceived as insolence. The noble himself grew even more purple, if that was possible. "I am Lord High Commander Vrix'tix of the 7th Imperial Fleet, 3rd heir to the eternal flame of Draknid Prime, and keeper of the sacred scales of justice." "And I," the doctor said while calibrating her equipment, "am the person trying to help you breathe better. Now, would you prefer we discuss your titles or your tertiary breathing chamber?" What followed was a tense silence, broken only by the soft beeping of medical equipment and what sounded suspiciously like one of the servants trying not to laugh. Finally, the noble spoke, his voice dripping with the kind of contempt usually reserved for something found growing under a rock. "Very well," he said, "but be aware that any mistake on your part will be considered an act of aggression against the Draknid Empire." The doctor checked her scanner again, noting with professional interest that the noble's blood pressure would be alarming in any species that hadn't evolved from creatures capable of surviving volcanic eruptions. Understood. Now, please describe when this discomfort began. As the noble launched into a lengthy description of his symptoms, most of which seemed to revolve around the apparently unbearable trauma of having to breathe slightly different air mixtures, the doctor couldn't help but think that this was shaping up to be one of those days that would either end up in the medical textbooks or the political history archives, possibly both. Little did she know, as she prepared to explain basic atmospheric adaptation to someone who probably owned several solar systems, that this routine examination would soon spiral into a diplomatic incident that would reshape the politics of an entire sector. But that's the thing about working in a galactic medical station. You never know when treating a common cold might lead to an interstellar crisis, or in this case, when telling a Draknid noble to take deep breaths would end up costing his empire a star system. As it turned out, explaining basic medical concepts to someone who considered breathing the same air as commoners beneath their dignity was about as productive as teaching quantum physics to a space rock. The noble's tertiary breathing chamber, a specialized organ Draknids used for processing high-altitude gases, was simply experiencing normal adaptation stress to the station's atmospheric mix. What you're experiencing is perfectly normal, the doctor explained, displaying a holographic model of Draknid respiratory anatomy. Your tertiary chamber is designed to adjust to different atmospheric conditions. It's actually working exactly as it should. Lord High Commander Vrix'tix's jewel-encrusted scales rattled in what the doctor had come to recognize as the Draknid equivalent of an aristocratic scoff. Impossible. Nothing about this discomfort is normal. I demand immediate treatment. The treatment, the doctor said with the patience of someone who had explained this concept 6 times already, is to allow your body to complete its natural adaptation process. Any medical intervention would actually slow down. Unacceptable! The noble's voice reverberated through the medical bay, causing several delicate instruments to vibrate. You will provide proper treatment immediately, or I shall have this entire station destroyed for incompetence. The doctor's medical scanner beeped urgently, warning of elevated stress indicators across all of the noble's biological systems. Your Excellency, please try to remain calm. Your agitation is only making the adaptation process more difficult. Calm? Calm? The noble's scales began to glow with heat, a concerning sign given that Draknid biochemistry included several highly combustible compounds. Do you have any idea how many medical professionals I could have brought from my homeworld? Experts who would not dare to suggest that I, a Lord High Commander, should simply wait like some common... The tirade ended abruptly as the noble's scales flashed from purple to a dangerous bright red. He clutched at his chest, where his primary heart was located, and made a sound that the doctor's translator couldn't quite process, but definitely didn't like. The doctor's training kicked in immediately. She moved forward with her scanner, only to be blocked by the wall of servants who had suddenly formed a protective circle around their master. Move, she ordered in a tone that would have made a drill sergeant proud. Your lord is experiencing cardiac distress. No human shall touch the sacred person of... One servant began. Either move or explain to your empire why you let your lord die from a preventable condition, the doctor snapped, already preparing emergency medications. Choose quickly. The servants hesitated, looking at their lord who was now making increasingly alarming noises and beginning to smoke slightly around the edges. The doctor used their moment of indecision to slip through their formation with the practiced ease of someone who had dealt with far too many protective family members in emergency rooms. Her scanner confirmed what she'd suspected. The combination of the noble's agitation and his body's natural adaptation process had triggered a cascade reaction in his unique biochemistry. His primary heart was approaching critical stress levels, and his tertiary breathing chamber was now completely sealed off, a defensive reaction that was only making things worse. "I need a Class 7 metabolic stabilizer and atmospheric pressure regulation now," she called out to the station's AI. The medical bay's systems hummed to life, adjusting the local environment to match Draknid homeworld conditions. The noble, however, wasn't done making things difficult. Between gasps, he managed to activate a communication device on his ornate wristband. "Imperial. Vessel. Emergency. Protocol." "Oh, no, you don't," the doctor muttered, recognizing the command sequence that would summon an armed medical team from his ship. "Computer. Initiate emergency quarantine protocols. Medical override authority." The station's shields snapped into place just as a transport beam from the Imperial vessel attempted to lock onto the noble. The resulting energy discharge created a spectacular light show and probably several diplomatic incidents. "You dare!" the noble wheezed, his scales now glowing hot enough to melt the expensive medical bed he was lying on. "Yes, I dare," the doctor replied, preparing an injection. "Because right now, your pride is literally killing you. Your body is going into shock because you couldn't accept that sometimes the correct medical treatment is to let your own healing processes work." She held up the injector. "This is going to save your life, but it's also going to knock you out for about 6 hours while your system resets. You can either accept that, or we can wait another 30 seconds until you lose consciousness anyway, at which point I'll do it without your permission because I took an oath to save lives, even the lives of patients who threatened to have me executed." The noble's eyes, all 4 of them, fixed on her with an intensity that suggested she had just signed her own death warrant. Then, remarkably, he gave a slight nod. The doctor administered the injection with practiced efficiency. As the noble's scales began to cool and his breathing stabilized, she turned to address his servants. "He'll need constant monitoring for the next 6 hours. I'll be staying to oversee his recovery personally." One of the servants, who appeared to be of slightly higher rank than the others, stepped forward. "The Empire will not forget this incident." "Good," the doctor replied, already checking the noble's vital signs. "Maybe next time one of your lords needs medical care, they'll remember that biology doesn't care about political rank." What happened next would become the stuff of legend in medical circles across the galaxy. The noble's ship, upon losing contact with their lord, initiated what they considered appropriate diplomatic responses. This involved positioning a fleet of warships around the medical station, demanding their lord's immediate release, and threatening to reduce the facility to atomic particles. The doctor, in response, did what any reasonable medical professional would do. She sent them detailed scans of their lord's condition, along with a politely worded suggestion that if they interfered with his treatment, she would be forced to file a formal complaint with the Galactic Medical Board for endangering a patient. The fact that such a complaint would require a full investigation, during which all parties would be required to testify under oath about exactly how their lord had ended up in this condition, including his refusal to follow basic medical advice, was left delicately implied. The standoff that followed would later be described in political histories as tense, and in medical journals as absolutely hilarious. The mighty Draknid Empire, capable of reducing entire solar systems to debris, found itself stymied by a single human doctor wielding nothing more dangerous than medical ethics and bureaucratic procedures. As the hours ticked by, the doctor maintained a constant vigil over her patient, documenting every change in his condition with the kind of meticulous detail that suggested she was either extremely thorough or building an absolutely bulletproof legal defense. Probably both. The noble's recovery proceeded exactly as she had predicted, which would have been more satisfying if she hadn't been fairly certain she was going to end up in an imperial prison once he woke up. But as she reminded herself while checking his vital signs for the 100th time, she had sworn an oath to do no harm, even if the patient in question would probably have her executed for helping them. What she didn't know was that her actions had already set in motion a chain of events that would reshape the power dynamics of an entire sector of space. Because while the noble slept, recovering from his near-death experience, various interested parties were beginning to take notice of a human doctor who had effectively held an imperial fleet at bay with nothing but medical regulations and an unwavering commitment to proper healthcare. And somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of the Galactic Medical Board, a very interesting complaint was about to be filed. The thing about galactic politics is that news travels faster than light, especially when that news involves a Draknid noble being medically sedated by a human doctor. By the time Lord High Commander Vrix'tix regained consciousness, the incident had already spawned 17 diplomatic protests, 42 medical ethics debates, and at least one surprisingly catchy holovid meme. The noble awoke to find his condition completely stabilized, his tertiary breathing chamber functioning perfectly, and his empire's reputation taking damage at roughly the same rate as a ship entering atmosphere without shields. The doctor stood nearby, updating medical records with the kind of calm usually reserved for people who had already accepted their imminent doom and decided to finish their paperwork anyway. "You," the noble began, his translator struggling to convey the full depth of his fury, "have committed an act of medical necessity," the doctor interrupted, not looking up from her records. "As documented in reports filed with the Galactic Medical Board, the Interspecies Healthcare Coalition, and your own empire's health ministry. Would you like copies?" The noble's scales shifted through several interesting colors before settling on a shade that suggested barely contained thermonuclear rage. "I will have you. Required to testify at a full medical review," the doctor suggested helpfully. "Yes, that's likely. I'm looking forward to discussing your case with the board, particularly the part where your biochemical readings proved that allowing natural adaptation would have prevented the entire incident." What followed was a silence so profound that several passing ships probably detected it on their sensors. The noble had just discovered something that many before him had learned the hard way. It's very difficult to threaten someone who has thoroughly documented your medical embarrassment, but the real drama was unfolding several light years away, in the offices of the Galactic Medical Board. The complaint filed by the doctor had landed on the desk of a particularly interesting official, a Zentorian who had spent centuries advocating for medical reform in the Outer Rim territories, the very territories controlled by the Draknid Empire. The official's report, which somehow leaked to every major news network simultaneously, revealed a pattern of the Empire interfering with medical care for political reasons. The incident with the human doctor was just the latest example, but it was the perfect catalyst for what followed. Other species began coming forward with their own stories. The Mariskians revealed how their medical research had been suppressed because it contradicted Draknid biological superiority claims. The Quantum Collective shared data about denied medical evacuations due to imperial security concerns. Even the normally reclusive crystal mines contributed evidence of medical technology being withheld from lower status species. The doctor, meanwhile, found herself becoming an unwitting symbol of resistance against medical imperialism. Her clinical notes were being quoted in parliamentary sessions. Her treatment protocols were being taught in medical schools as examples of standing firm against political pressure. Someone had even made her face into a holographic sticker with the caption, "Have you threatened your doctor today?" The noble's empire tried to contain the situation through their usual methods, threats, bribes, and strongly worded diplomatic messages. But they discovered that medical professionals across the galaxy had apparently been waiting for exactly this moment to express their collective frustration with political interference in healthcare. The situation reached its breaking point when the doctor received an urgent message from a medical outpost in a distant star system. They had a Draknid patient exhibiting the same symptoms as the noble had, but their local authorities were refusing to implement the treatment protocol she had developed. Political pride was once again endangering medical care. The doctor's response was to publish her complete findings, including detailed biochemical analyses showing that the Draknid's supposedly superior physiology actually required regular adaptation periods, something their own medical community had apparently known but kept quiet about for political reasons. This revelation hit the Empire where it hurt most, their carefully constructed image of biological supremacy. Other species began questioning whether the Draknids were truly as naturally superior as they claimed. Medical researchers started publishing papers about evolutionary trade-offs and the benefits of biological diversity. The noble, watching his empire's carefully maintained reputation unravel over what should have been a routine medical visit, finally did something truly unprecedented. He admitted the treatment had worked. Not publicly, of course. He simply stopped demanding the doctor's execution and instead filed a brief statement acknowledging that his condition had been adequately addressed. In diplomatic terms, this was equivalent to a full parade with fireworks and a signed confession. The implications rippled through imperial space faster than a quantum transmission. A group of reform-minded imperial citizens, many from the medical community, seized the moment to push for changes. They pointed out that if humans could develop better treatments for Draknid physiology than their own doctors, perhaps it was time to reconsider some of their empire's more restrictive medical policies. The star system, where the second case had appeared, became a focal point. Its local government, sensing an opportunity, declared itself a medical autonomy zone, where healthcare would be provided without regard to species or status. They invited medical professionals from all species to establish practices there, effectively challenging imperial authority through the power of healthcare policy. The Empire found itself in an impossible position. They couldn't suppress the medical rebellion without confirming everything their critics were saying about them. They couldn't allow it to continue without undermining their authority. And they definitely couldn't admit that a human doctor had effectively proved their entire medical establishment had been covering up basic biological facts for political reasons. As the crisis deepened, the doctor continued her work at the medical station, treating patients of all species with the same uncompromising care that had started this whole mess. She had recently received several interesting job offers from the newly independent star system, all carefully worded to avoid mentioning treason while making it clear they would love to have the doctor who had accidentally sparked a medical revolution. The noble, fully recovered, but nursing a wounded pride that would probably take several generations to heal, had departed the station with significantly less fanfare than he had arrived with. His final words to the doctor were delivered through 3 layers of subordinates and translated into the most diplomatically neutral language possible. Your treatment was effective. Coming from a Draknid noble, this was practically a marriage proposal. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, a star system was discovering that the most effective way to break free from an empire wasn't through weapons or wars, but through the simple insistence that everyone deserved proper medical care, even if that care sometimes meant telling powerful people to sit down, be quiet, and let their bodies heal naturally. 6 months after the incident that would become known as the medical mutiny, or in less formal circles, how to lose a star system by being a terrible patient, the galaxy had changed in ways that even the most sophisticated predictive AIs hadn't seen coming. The rebellious star system, now officially known as the independent medical haven of Proxima Therapeutica, though most people just called it Doc's World, had become a center for revolutionary medical practices. Species that had been hereditary enemies for millennia found themselves sharing hospital waiting rooms, leading to several breakthrough discoveries about common biological foundations, and at least one instance of a Chronaxian and a Void Dweller bonding over their shared hatred of filling out insurance forms. The doctor's treatment protocol for Draknid respiratory adaptation had been published in the Galactic Journal of Xenomedicine, complete with a devastatingly polite footnote thanking Lord High Commander Vrix'tix for his invaluable contribution to medical science, a phrase that would haunt him at every Imperial Court function for the rest of his life. But the real revolution was happening in the Empire itself. The Draknid medical community, forced to acknowledge centuries of suppressed research, was experiencing something of a renaissance. Young Draknid doctors were openly collaborating with physicians from other species, leading to advancements that would have been impossible under the old system of biological supremacy. The Empire's response to all this was a masterclass in saving face while completely reversing position. They announced a progressive new initiative in medical sovereignty, which basically meant they were pretending the whole independence thing had been their idea all along. They even established a special medical administrative zone around Doc's world, effectively acknowledging its independence while making it sound like a planned administrative restructuring. All of this political maneuvering might have remained just another footnote in galactic history, except for one small detail. The Draknids' most closely guarded medical secret was about to become public knowledge. It turned out that their species, for all their claims of superiority, had a genetic predisposition to a particularly nasty form of cellular degradation. They'd been keeping it under control for generations through a combination of genetic engineering and specialized treatments, all while maintaining the fiction of their natural perfection. And guess who had just discovered a better treatment method? The humans. Specifically, a research team inspired by the doctor's original treatment of the noble's respiratory condition. They found that the same principles of allowing and supporting natural adaptation could be applied to cellular regeneration, potentially offering a permanent solution rather than just ongoing management. The Empire's options were limited. They could either admit they needed human medical expertise or watch their entire ruling class suffer from a preventable condition. Pride met pragmatism in a head-on collision, and pragmatism won by a landslide, which is how, 1 year to the day after the noble had stormed into that medical station demanding immediate treatment, the Draknid Empire signed the Galactic Medical Cooperation Treaty. The document, spanning thousands of pages and written in every known language, including 3 that hadn't existed when the crisis began, essentially amounted to, "Fine, you can all have decent health care." The doctor, who had steadfastly refused all attempts to draw her into the political side of things, finally agreed to give one public statement. Standing in the same medical bay where it had all started, she looked directly into the cameras and said, "Medicine doesn't care about your politics. Neither do diseases. Neither should we." The recording became required viewing in medical schools across the galaxy. As for Lord High Commander Vrix'tix, he eventually found a way to turn his embarrassment into an advantage. He became known as the noble who had sacrificed his pride for the greater good of medical advancement, a reputation that, while not exactly what he'd planned for his legacy, proved surprisingly useful in imperial politics. He even started referring to himself as a catalyst for change, though never within earshot of any human doctors. The final irony came when the Empire's own statistical bureau released a report showing that their loss of the star system had actually resulted in a net gain for imperial citizens. It turned out that having a nearby independent medical haven staffed by the galaxy's best doctors was good for everyone, even empires built on questionable claims of biological superiority. And so, in the end, a single case of wounded pride and wounded breathing chambers had led to the restructuring of galactic medicine, the independence of a star system, and the grudging admission that maybe, just maybe, being told to take deep breaths and let your body heal itself wasn't actually an insult to your imperial dignity. The doctor still keeps the noble's medical records archived in a special folder labelled "How Not to Be a Patient." It serves as a useful teaching aid for new residents learning to deal with difficult cases, both medical and political. And somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of the Galactic Medical Board, that original complaint still circulates, passed around during particularly stressful days, as a reminder that sometimes the most powerful medicine isn't found in advanced technology or exotic treatments, but in the simple courage to tell a powerful person, "Please sit down, stop complaining, and let me do my job." Because in the end, the most important lesson wasn't about winning or losing star systems. It was about the universal truth that no matter how many stars you rule, how many gems you embed in your scales, or how impressively British your translator makes you sound, everyone eventually needs a doctor, and when that time comes, it's probably best to just take their advice, even if it costs you a star system.